I went into the forest because I had done it many times before. I recorded everything I explored, not because I thought something bad would happen, but because documenting it gave me structure and focus while walking alone for hours. That morning felt normal enough for me not to question my decisions, even when I parked farther than usual and noticed there were no other vehicles nearby. I told myself that silence was expected in places like this, and that isolation was part of the experience I was looking for. I started recording as soon as I crossed the tree line, describing the terrain and my route out loud so I could retrace my steps later if I needed. The forest looked ordinary, dense but familiar, and that false sense of normality made it easier to ignore the fact that I had no signal and no clear trail guiding me anymore. I noticed the first photograph when I stopped to adjust the camera strap, and at first, I thought it was trash left behind by someone else. When I got closer, I realized it was a printed missing person poster, carefully stapled to the tree at chest height. As I recorded it, I felt confused rather than scared, because the photo looked official and detailed, complete with a name and date. I stepped back to get a wider shot, and that's when I saw another poster on the next tree, and another one beyond that. I walked slowly, filming every image while trying to understand why they were placed so evenly, always facing the same direction. The deeper I went, the more posters appeared, and it became impossible to believe this was random or abandoned. I stopped to talk to the camera for a moment and listened, not expecting to hear anything specific, but needing to confirm that I was still alone. The quiet didn't reassure me, and for the first time, I considered turning back, even though curiosity kept pulling me forward. Before moving forward, I stood still and tried to calm my breathing, telling myself that panicking without proof would only make things worse. I checked my battery, adjusted the camera, and convinced myself to document a bit more before leaving. The posters started forming patterns, and that realization made my stomach tighten in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. They weren't just nailed to trees randomly. They were marking paths, intersections, and clearings that were invisible unless you followed the images. As I slowly rotated in place, filming the surrounding trees, I heard footsteps that didn't match my own movement. They were steady and synchronized, which made it impossible to dismiss them as animals or falling branches. When I spotted the group moving through the trees, my chest tightened and my legs felt unsteady, because there was something deeply wrong about how coordinated they were. Their shaved heads caught the light, and none of them spoke or reacted to my presence. I backed away carefully, trying not to draw attention, but the ground beneath me collapsed suddenly and yanked me upward with violent force. The trap snapped around my ankle and hoisted me into the air, slamming my body hard enough to knock the breath out of me. Hanging upside down, I shouted until my throat burned, watching the group drift away without urgency, as if they already knew I wasn't going anywhere. The pain in my leg grew sharper with every movement, and the realization that no one was coming settled in slowly and heavily. Hours passed as I remained suspended, fighting cramps, exhaustion, and fear that kept escalating as daylight disappeared. When footsteps finally returned, my relief vanished the moment I saw a single man standing beneath me, calmly observing my condition. He welcomes me. He cut the rope without warning, letting me crash to the ground, and immediately kicked me hard enough to curl my body inward. He didn't rush, didn't shout, and didn't seem angry, which made everything feel more deliberate and controlled. Before moving me, he waited in silence, scanning the trees as if listening for signals I couldn't hear. That pause made it clear that this wasn't improvisation, but routine, and that realization made my chest tighten with real fear. He dragged me through dense brush until we reached a truck hidden beneath branches and leaves, and tied my hands with practiced precision. Every bump during the drive sent pain through my body, and I couldn't tell how far we traveled or in which direction. The house appeared suddenly between trees, isolated and deliberately placed far from any road. Inside, everything was clean and stripped of personality, with a single chair fixed to the floor and restraints already attached. He shaved my head without explanation, pressing my skull down when I resisted, and every movement he made was calm and confident. He hit me repeatedly, not out of rage, but to keep me compliant, while asking questions that felt meaningless and disconnected. He slammed my head against the back of the chair to keep me still while shaving, warning me not to move if I wanted to keep my teeth intact. When I tried to pull my arms, he punched me in the stomach hard enough to steal my breath and waited until I could breathe again, just to do it a second time. He pressed his boot against my injured ankle, applying slow pressure while watching my reaction, clearly measuring how much pain was enough without breaking me yet. Others entered the room later and watched without reacting, their faces blank and detached. One of them, however, looked at me longer than the rest, and that prolonged eye contact made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. Before anything changed, The man left the room and locked the door behind him, leaving me alone with the group. The silence that followed felt heavier than the violence that came before. The man who had been watching me stepped forward slowly, checking the door and the windows before kneeling beside the chair. His hands trembled as he cut the restraints, and the fear on his face felt real and uncontrolled. "You can't stay here." When he lifted his sleeve, I saw a scar that matched one of the posters I had filmed earlier, and the connection hit me hard enough to make my breathing uneven. He wasn't part of this by choice, and whatever held him there had already broken him. He pointed toward a back exit and stayed behind as I stumbled through the door, barely able to stay upright. I ran without direction, driven by panic rather than strategy, falling and getting up repeatedly until I reached the road. The police listened and followed me back into the forest, taking my account seriously enough to search the area thoroughly. I showed them the footage I had uploaded earlier, explaining the layout and the paths marked by the posters. When we arrived, there was nothing left to find. The trees were bare, the ground showed no signs of disturbance, and the house simply did not exist. Search teams returned multiple times, but every attempt ended the same way, with no evidence and no explanation. The people from the posters remained missing, and no new leads ever surfaced. Life didn't return to normal after that, even though the world around me moved on quickly. My injuries healed enough to function, but the memory of that place stayed sharp and persistent. Whatever happened in that forest didn't end when I escaped. And the fact that nothing was found makes it clear that the system protecting those people is still intact. I don't think the missing were meant to be found, and I'm certain that I was never meant to leave.
People think the last subway is quiet, but it's abandoned, not quiet. That's a big difference. That night I was coming back from work, just wanting to get home. The station was still lit, but it felt like it had been forgotten on purpose. The train arrived late and almost empty, with only a few people sitting far from each other, staring at their phones or the floor. No one made eye contact, and no one spoke, which felt normal for that hour, but it also made every sound louder, every movement more noticeable. When I got off at my stop, the doors closed behind me with a sound that felt final, like the end of something I wasn't ready to notice yet. I walked towards the exit, passing the open turnstiles, thinking about food and sleep and nothing else. That's when I realized how empty the station really was, because even the background noise was gone, and all I could hear was the buzz of the lights and my own steps echoing too clearly. She grabbed my arm hard enough to stop me completely, and the shock of it made my heart jump. I turned and saw a young woman standing way too close, breathing fast, her eyes wide and unfocused, like she'd been running for a long time and never really stopped. Her clothes were dirty, her hair was stuck to her face, and she kept looking past me instead of at me. "Please, I need help. It's following me." I asked her what she meant and tried to pull back my arm, but she held on tighter and shook her head, clearly panicking, clearly not thinking straight. She kept glancing toward the tunnels like she expected something to appear at any second, and that made me uneasy in a way that I couldn't explain yet. Then I really looked at her face, and something clicked in my head that made my stomach drop. I had seen her before, not in person, but on posters taped to walls and poles, the kind people stopped noticing after a few weeks. A missing girl. Same eyes. I told her I recognized her and that people were looking for her, but she didn't look relieved at all. She whispered that it didn't matter anymore, that nothing worked once it noticed you, and then, without warning, she let go of me and ran back into the station, toward the darker side where no one ever goes. For a moment I stood there, frozen by confusion rather than fear, trying to decide if I was about to do something very stupid or very necessary. The station felt wrong now. Not empty, but tense, like something was being held back. The lights flickered slightly, not enough to go out, just enough to make me notice. I told myself she was hurt and scared, and that leaving her alone would be worse than following her. So I ran after her, calling out for her to stop, even though my voice sounded weak in that space. Her footsteps echoed ahead of me, fast and uneven, leading me past areas I'd never used before. She slipped through a maintenance gate that was open just enough to pass, and the smell changed immediately, turning damp and metallic. The lights were spaced far apart, leaving long stretches of darkness between them, and I had to slow down to avoid slipping on the wet floor. Every step made me more aware of how far I was from the main station. When I finally caught up to her in a wide service area filled with old equipment and broken signs, I grabbed her arm again, breathing hard, my chest burning from the run. She fought me, not with clear movements, but with panic, twisting and hitting my shoulder, repeating the same word again and again. "Guardian! Guardian! Guardian!" She said it like it was a fact, not a story, like something everyone should already know. I tried to calm her down, telling her we could go back and find help, but she suddenly went still in a way that scared me more than the struggling. Her eyes locked onto something behind me, and her face changed completely, like all the panic turned into pure terror at once. She started crying without making any sounds and lifted her hands towards her face, digging her nails into her skin as if she was trying to escape her own head. I grabbed her wrists and held them down. My heart was racing as I told her to stop, that there was nothing there, even though I hadn't looked yet and didn't really believe myself. She kept staring past my shoulder, her body shaking, her breathing uneven, and she tried again to reach her eyes, stronger this time, desperate, like hurting herself was the only option she had left. I held her tight, struggling to keep control, feeling how thin she was, how little strength she had. Then, the sound came from the tunnel behind us. Deep and heavy, like something big shifting its weight against concrete. The floor vibrated slightly, dust falling from above, and my focus broke for a second as fear finally took over. That second was enough. She tore herself free and ran straight into the darkness, screaming for me not to let it see her. I chased her again, even though every instinct told me to turn around and run the other way, because the sound behind me was closer now and clearly moving. Each step echoed heavier than it should have, and the air felt thick in my lungs as I forced myself to keep going. When I finally looked back, I saw it, filling the tunnel, a massive shape barely fitting between the walls. Its body was moving with slow confidence instead of speed. It wasn't human, not even close. It had a broad frame and its head was shaped all wrong. Horns were scraping against the ceiling as it advanced. I tripped when my foot caught on something unseen, slamming my knee into the floor hard enough to make my vision blur. The pain was sharp and immediate, but fear pushed me back up as the sound of its breathing grew louder behind me, wet and heavy. I ran into a storage room with no exit, shelves lining the walls. My mind was racing as I searched for anywhere to go. I stepped into the room slowly, blocking the doorway completely as its presence filled the space, making it hard to think straight. It reached out and crushed one of the metal shelves with ease, the noise loud and final, and I barely managed to slip past it, feeling heat and movement close enough to touch my back as I escaped. I don't remember the exact path I took after that, only that I ran until my lungs burned and my legs screamed in pain. I followed emergency lights instead of logic, and when I finally burst through an exit door and onto the platform, the normal sounds of the city hit me all at once. The station looked clean and empty again, like nothing had happened. And that made everything worse, because it felt like I was the only proof that any of this was real. I collapsed on a bench, shaking, checking the tunnels again and again. But there was nothing there. Police came later and listened without interrupting, but their faces told me enough. They searched, they checked cameras. They didn't find the girl. But there was footage of a strange figure. I stopped taking the subway at night after that, even when it meant walking long distances or spending money I didn't have. But I never want to cross paths with that creature again. Since then, I no longer believe in reality as we know it.
If you ever lose someone and nobody finds the body, the story never really ends. This is not a story about closure or learning something from pain, because nothing good came out of it. We were on vacation and we went skiing, just a normal adventure for a couple. The place was busy but controlled, with clear signs, open trails, and rescue teams everywhere, which made everything feel safe. She was always more confident than me on skis, faster and less cautious, while I preferred staying on wide trails and following the rules. We joked about that difference constantly, and that day was no different, which is why nothing felt dangerous or serious at first. The trail split near the middle of the mountain, with one path clearly marked and crowded, and another one narrower, quieter, but still officially open. She stopped, pointed at the narrow path, and smiled like it was an obvious choice, while I hesitated and told her I would take the main trail and meet her at the bottom. She didn't argue. She just pushed forward and started going down without looking back, moving fast and confidently like she always did. I watched her red jacket for a few seconds until the curve of the slope swallowed her completely. When I reached the bottom of my trail, she wasn't there, and at first I assumed she was just ahead, maybe talking to someone or adjusting her gear. I waited, checked my phone, walked around the lift area, and told myself to relax because there was no reason to panic yet. Minutes passed, then more minutes, and the place started to empty as the afternoon faded, which made every absence feel louder. I tried calling her, sending messages, checking every nearby spot where she could have stopped, but nothing made sense anymore. That was the moment I went to ski patrol, still hoping this was just a misunderstanding, still believing that in a few minutes she would appear annoyed and laughing about how dramatic I was being. Once the search officially started, everything slowed down in a way that made my thoughts race even more. I gave her name, her photos, her clothes, repeating the same information to different people until it stopped feeling real. Rescue teams went up and down the mountain with dogs, radios, and snowmobiles, while I stood nearby pretending to be useful, even though there was nothing I could actually do. As night fell, the cold became sharper and the mountain looked empty and indifferent. I was told to go inside and rest, but I refused, staying awake near the base, watching the darkness and imagining her somewhere out there, waiting and getting colder. The next day brought helicopters, more people, and more organized searching, but also a change in tone that I noticed immediately. The questions became more careful, more repetitive, as if they were already checking for mistakes rather than expecting good news. Before the real fear fully settled, I was taken into a small office where they explained survival limits, exposure times, and weather conditions, using calm voices that did not match the situation at all. Days passed and hope started changing shape. Posters were printed, messages spread online, and her parents arrived with faces that looked older than they should have. Searches continued, but they became shorter and more cautious, focusing on areas already checked. When they finally told us that chances of survival were extremely low, I argued quietly, insisting that she was strong, experienced, and capable, but my voice sounded weak even to me. The official decision to stop active searching felt worse than hearing about death, because there was nothing final about it. People slowly returned to their lives and messages of support became less frequent. I went back home, kept working, and answered questions with short explanations, while inside I stayed stuck on that mountain, replaying the moment she disappeared and wondering how a single choice could erase a person so completely. 5 years later, on a night, the doorbell rang. I opened the door expecting a delivery or a neighbor, and my brain took a few seconds to understand what my eyes were seeing. She was standing there, alive, clean, and calm, wearing clothes I had never seen before, with darker hair cut shorter than I remembered. Her face looked relaxed, almost happy, and that expression hit me harder than any injury ever could, because it did not match 5 years of cold, fear, and silence. She said my name in a normal tone and stepped inside without hesitation, looking around the apartment as if she was visiting a place she already knew. I started asking questions immediately, too many at once, but she avoided every single one without getting defensive, repeating that she did not want to talk about the mountain. When she said she had nowhere to go, I let her stay because my thoughts were a mess. After all, part of me was still frozen on that slope waiting for her to come back. The first night was quiet but uncomfortable, with small things that did not feel right if I paid attention. She barely touched her food, chewing slowly and stopping for long moments like she forgot what she was doing, while her eyes stayed fixed on nothing in particular. Over the next days, her behavior became harder to explain. She woke up before sunrise every morning and stood by the window for long stretches, not looking outside but slightly downward, like she was watching something move just out of sight. Sometimes I would find her standing in the hallway or the living room, completely still, eyes open, breathing slow, as if she had paused in the middle of an action and never resumed it. When I spoke to her during those moments, she reacted late, turning her head slowly and smiling like she was embarrassed to be caught. One night, I followed a noise into the backyard and found her crouched low, scooping dirt into her mouth with both hands, chewing without urgency or disgust. When I called her name, she didn't answer, and when I touched her shoulder, she flinched sharply and stared at me like she didn't recognize me. She apologized afterward, smiling again, saying she was just tired and adjusting, but the explanation did not fit what I had seen. I started sleeping less, locking my door sometimes without fully admitting why, and watching her closely during the day. What scared me the most was how normal she acted between those moments, laughing at jokes and talking about the future like nothing had ever interrupted her life. That contrast made it harder to convince myself that this was just trauma. Whatever came back was not the same person who disappeared on that mountain. The tension inside the apartment kept building quietly. That night, the house was silent until fast footsteps echoed down the hallway. My door opened violently and she stood there holding a kitchen knife, her face focused and empty. She moved toward me without speaking, swinging the knife with force that felt practiced, hiding the mattress and tearing fabric as I rolled away and fell to the floor. I tried to block her arm, but she was stronger than I expected, and the blade cut my arm just enough to hurt and distract me. I pushed her with everything I had, sending her into the wall hard enough to make a loud crack, and for a second I thought she was injured. Instead, she looked at me and started laughing loud and uncontrolled, like the situation amused her deeply. She ran out of the room and out of the apartment, still laughing as she disappeared down the stairs, leaving behind blood, broken furniture, and a silence that felt heavier than any noise she had made. The police took my statement seriously, but didn't find her. They looked at old photos, listened carefully, and eventually reached the same dead end everyone else had reached before. No sightings followed, no updates, and no explanation that made sense. Sometimes I wonder if the woman who came back was ever really her, or if something else learned how to walk, speak, and smile like her after she disappeared.